Welcome to episode 17 of our Garden States Microdose monthly webcast. I'm broadcasting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as anyone who might be tuned in today or watching the broadcast in the future. I'd also like to recognise that we benefit from the knowledge and insights of First Nations people here in Australia and around the world. And just also mention NAIDOC Week was at the start of July. NAIDOC being the National Aborigines and Islanders Day Observance Committee. It's not a day, it's a week. And there was some really fantastic events that were put on, and I just wanted to highlight one organisation in particular that do some really fantastic work. And that organisation is Tongbarangi Ngara. Tongbarangi Ngara means, let me just go to their about page. I believe it's in Woiwurrung language. Tongbarangi Ngara means born to dance. And the three guys that run that, Sam and Seth Nolan, and I can't actually remember the other guy's name, but Sam and Seth I've known for many years and are really fantastic guys. They do a lot of events. Their website is borntodance.org.au, and I'll get the moderators to put that in the comments so you can check that out. They ran an event for NAIDOC Week. They also ran a fantastic party down at Merry Creek in Coburg, which was one of the, we're still sort of getting out of lockdown mode as COVID takes off again, but it was nice just before sort of COVID took off again to get out and about with a whole bunch of people, because it's been quite a while, and really it reminded me how many people there are within our community and the broader communities that you just don't get to come across when you're locked in your house, and you might not be reaching out over SMS or email or things like that, because you're used to seeing people at events like this, and it was a really good event. So borntodance.org.au, highly recommend checking them out. So yes, welcome to tonight's broadcast. My name is Nick Wallis. I'm the co-founder of the Australian Psychedelic Society, producer of the former 3CR program In Psychedelia, which ran for 5 years, and unfortunately COVID really got me on that, but now I'm here doing these webcasts with EGA. I've also spent over a decade working, volunteering, and doing various other roles, board roles, things like that in harm reduction, in the policy space, and in the implementation of harm reduction, especially in our party scene here in Victoria. Thank you to all of you for joining us live tonight on the YouTube stream. Remember that we are live, so our moderators there in the comments, they're waiting for your questions, comments, and we will be taking questions for our special guest speakers tonight. So please don't hesitate to drop those in there and get the conversation going. Perhaps first you can tell us what land you are on, and maybe just introduce yourself to the other people that are live with us here tonight. If you haven't already, hit subscribe on the EGA channel. We are heading towards 10,000 subscribers. I believe we just hit the 9,000 mark not too long ago, and would love to get that up to 10,000. Share the EGA YouTube channel with people that you think might be interested as well. And if you click the little bell icon, if you're familiar with YouTube, then you'll know what it does. But if you're not, and you've signed into YouTube, that bell notification will let you know when we're doing things like this, live videos, and also when we upload new videos as well. And we have been uploading new videos. Actually, I'm going to bring up the channel now. On the EGA YouTube channel, you can see there we are live tonight. But Kane's series of in-depth discussions and analysis of mushrooms continues, with the latest being into Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom, and that is available now on our YouTube channel. So if you hit that bell, you'll get notified every time that we upload something new, and then you can keep up to date with everything that we have going. And if you are watching this back later, then please do engage with the community via social media. The conversation always keeps going, as we've especially seen this week, and we'll get into a little bit of that. in tonight's presentation. But first up, Garden States is fast approaching. We're over halfway through the year now. The shortest day has come and passed, and we are starting to see inklings of spring weather here and there. We will be having our Garden States event in person Friday to Sunday. Friday will be a web streamed day, and there were some pretty big announcements of guests recently. In fact, one is somebody that helped keep my sanity over the lockdowns, and that's Douglas Rushkoff. Douglas you're probably familiar with the name. Douglas has been involved with the sort of psychedelic and what's a broader way to put it? Well, he puts it as Team Human. He has a podcast called Team Human, fantastic podcast. That's what saved my sanity through the lockdowns. He's a media theorist specialist who presents to a wide variety of people and is highly knowledgeable and just really has the right critical edge to what he talks about. And Douglas Rushkoff will be joining us at this year's conference via stream. So that's our latest announcement. So make sure that you grab your ticket for the event. You can also camp with us, and that's highly recommended if you can. The camping will be happening at a venue called Condor's Nest, which is a little bit away from Pakenham, up the hill into Gembrook amongst the trees and the forest. And you can book that. Head to the gardenstates.org website and you can find information there, or their website, condorsnest.com.au, and you can look at that beautiful picture. Looks very nice. The way to experience an EGA event, I think. So yes, we've got a few things coming up for you tonight. So the title of tonight's episode is I've lost my title. Altered Policy, Harm Reduction and Therapeutic Horizons. And we have one special guest, Dr. Nikola Ognyenovits, who will be joining us a little bit later to talk about harm reduction, to talk about psychedelics and other substances in therapeutic setting, and his experience with altered states. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Stephen Bright, Vice President of PRISM, Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine, a little bit later as well. Make sure to stay up to date with everything that EGA has on offer as well. The best way to do that, there's that chart. Best way to do that is to head to the website, entheogenesis.org, and /connect, where you can subscribe to our newsletter. When you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get the most most up to date about what's going on. You'll get announcements about any special guests. You'll get announcements about our webcasts. You'll get information about camping, and you'll also hear about the launch of new resources, but also the launch of this this particular new resource that I've been talking about for the past few webcasts. This is sort of what it looks like, and it is going to be launched in the next few weeks. So make sure that you are connected with us and subscribe to the newsletter so that you can get onto this. It's a chart sort of akin to the TripSit chart, if you're familiar with that. TripSit chart being a sort of looking at a whole bunch of different substances and how they interact with one another. But this one, for the EGA perspective, is different plants and how they might interact with each other. Beautiful design has gone into this chart as well, and a lot of work and time has gone into it, and that will be launched soon. We're going to be hearing from Liam Engel a little bit later, who's going to be presenting this. Grow globs quick, micrografting peyote and other slow-growing mescaline cacti. He's going to be presenting that a little bit later. But first up, I wanted to get into a couple of short videos for just sort of getting us into the harm reduction mode, I suppose. So we'll start off. Actually, we'll start off with a something that's happened in the psychedelic area. I'll just go straight into it. Starting off with a bit of sad news, although living to the age of 91 is a pretty good effort. Anne Shulgin passed away on July 9th of this year, just a few weeks ago. Anne was the co-founder of Transform Press, which she co-founded in 1991 with her husband, Sasha Shulgin, out of their shared passion and commitment to an uncensored examination of psychoactive compounds. Through the press, they co-authored and published P-Cal, A Chemical Love Story in 1991, and T-Cal, The Continuation in 1997, which are cult classics. You might even have it in your library. I've got it sitting near me right now, where they go through a number of phenethylamines and tryptamines, a lot of them novel, and document these substances, including from sort of, I guess the word is phenomenological, but documenting what actually happens under the influence of these substances, looking for other interesting things out there. They also contributed jointly to several other publications: The Secret Chef, The Secret Chief, The Secret Chief Revealed, Entheogens and the Future of Religion, and Ecstasy, The Complete Guide. And has served as a therapist, facilitating the use of MDMA and 2CB in therapeutic settings while those substances were still legal. So this is 1980s, maybe even late 1970s, I think mid-1980s. Anne Shulgin and Sasha Shulgin are absolute luminaries of the psychedelic scene, and she will absolutely be missed. And I'll just show you this this article from Synergetic Press, but you'll find plenty of articles about Anne. There's some great videos on the MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelics Studies YouTube channel, and she's also been at a number of psychedelic conferences. The Women's Visionary Conference has some great videos of Anne talking about the shadow, and I highly recommend that you open another tab, bookmark those, and watch those later. She will be sorely missed, but her contribution was massive. Thank you, Anne, for all that you did. Before we hear from tonight's special guest speaker, I just wanted to alert you to a few things that have been going on in the world of harm reduction. The first one, this is an alert that went out specifically for Victorians. It went out late last month, so as things change, it may not be relevant now, but I wanted to let you know about it anyway. This was an alert from Harm Reduction Victoria and from DanceWise. It comes through the Department of Health and is put together through a large group of experts, people working in emergency, people who are working with alcohol and other drugs. There are many sources that this comes from, and this was for a substance that was being sold as ketamine, but was actually the novel opioid protonotazine. This is a very strong opioid. It's a novel opioid, so there's not as much research about it. That's just the nature of novel substances. But it has been sold as if it is ketamine. Looks like powder crystals. It's got a yellowish tinge to it. And it as it's an opioid, it has a vastly different effect profile to ketamine. But people might mistake somebody that looks like they're going into perhaps a K-hole when they're actually overdosing on opioids. So if you are somebody or know people that are taking recreational ketamine, then it's something to be aware of, and it's always a good idea to understand what naloxone is, naloxone being an opioid receptor agonist, or agonist. And it reverses the effects of opioids and reverses the effect of opioid overdose. You can get your hands on naloxone. Recent law changes have meant that anybody can get their hands on it, and it is a good thing to keep in a first aid kit or something like that. But the big announcement this month was the launch of, or the announcement that there will be a 6-month trial of a pill testing centre, a fixed site pill testing centre here in Australia, in Canberra. Of course, Canberra gets all the good things, all the good drug policy. I was hoping to have a chat with Dr. David Caldicott, who is from Harm Reduction Australia and Pill Testing Australia. Unfortunately, he's a very busy man. I don't know how he does it. He's got very, very busy life going on. So we haven't been able to get him for tonight's episode. But here's a couple of tweets and pictures from the centre. So people will be able to take in a substance that they want tested, and then the expert analysts will analyze the substance and provide a report on that substance. So this has been trialled before at Groove and the Moo Festival a couple of times. The most recent time it was actually cancelled. This was right before the election as well, so who knows what was going on there. But the fixed site is a very welcome progression in drug policy in Australia, and we hope that this test will lead to results that can be shown to other jurisdictions, and hopefully similar initiatives can be introduced. A couple more pictures. Congratulations to everyone at Harm Reduction Australia and Pill Testing Australia, as well as Karma, which is the harm reduction organisation based in Canberra. That's the Canberra... No, I'm not going to try and get the acronym right, but CAHMA, and they're also supporting it. And here's some more pictures. Some of the information there. There's the DanceWise resources there. DanceWise in Victoria. It's a tiny sample that's tested, so people don't need to be giving up a whole baggie of drugs to be able to test these things. And here's the lab equipment here. So this is using what kind of spectrometer is it? I can't tell from the picture, but fancy lab equipment. This is not just your average reagent chemical test. So this is huge news, and we really hope that it means that other jurisdictions will be able to introduce this, because for the past couple of years, we haven't really had many music festivals or events. Obviously, we've had a lot of lockdowns, but right before the lockdowns were happening, drug testing and drug policy, especially at music festivals and events, was high on the sort of a public discussion board. It was being discussed widely. There wasn't necessarily agreement about it, but there was a lot of discussion going on, and there was an inquest in New South Wales, as there were a number of deaths a few years ago at music festivals, and we hope that drug policy will change. Although you may have seen that Splendor in the Mud, as it got relabeled, which is a festival up near Byron Bay, in that kind of area, which was flooded out. But there was a lot of sniffer dog activity. New South Wales Police very heavy on the sniffer dogs, which is a policy which is roundly condemned by people working in drug policy and harm reduction as something that is ineffective and potentially dangerous as well. Also, tomorrow is World Hepatitis C Day. Hepatitis C widely affecting people who inject drugs, especially. But now there is essentially a cure. I believe now people really don't need to have Hep C anymore. It can be cured. That information hasn't reached widely enough. Obviously, people that are in marginalized populations, or that have other difficulties, may not be able to easily and readily access that information. But if you do know somebody, if you have friends, family, or just know somebody that would benefit from this knowledge, do look out for the media releases that will be going out for World Hepatitis C Day tomorrow. And that's our wrap of harm reduction in Australia, for the moment anyway. Over to me. My apologies. Thanks, me, was what I said at the start there. This is Garden State's Microdose Webcast number 17, and I'd like to now introduce our first special guest, Dr. Nikola Ognyenovits. Dr. Nikola Ognyenovits is a Hungarian-born Australian addiction medicine specialist physician with a strong interest in psychedelic research and its clinical applications for mental health conditions, including complex developmental trauma, PTSD, depression, and anxiety disorders, and for substance use disorders. Currently working at as a staff specialist in Metro North Alcohol and Drug Service, as well as a private practice in Brisbane. In his private practice, he has been providing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which we'll be hearing a little bit about tonight, supporting clients through selection, preparation, and integration of their experiences after ketamine sessions. Nikola also sees clients for bad trip integration after difficult psychedelic experiences that have happened elsewhere. Dr. Nikola participated in Groff transpersonal training, shamanic healing, and recently completed training with the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, or MAPS, in MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for a research project with Monash University. He's a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, chapter of Addiction Medicine, is involved in the advocacy to inform drug policy and service development, and is a senior lecturer at the University of Queensland School of Medicine, where he contributes to the education of medical students and other health professionals. In his early career, he worked in psychiatry, emergency medicine, aeromedical retrievals, and anaesthetics in rural centres of Australia. Nikola, welcome to tonight's program. Oh, that's...
Thank you for having me, and good evening, everyone. It's late hour on the East Coast. I'm honored to be here. I just discussed it with Ronnie and Nick. My first exposure to entheogenesis went to a conference in Melbourne in 2010 when Rick Dublin first came to Australia, and after that session was PRISM established as well. I would like to acknowledge the land that I am at the moment, the traditional owners, the Jagera people, and the land is called Kurilpa, which is means the land of the water rats, which are very smart animals. I would like to also acknowledge all the people who are suffering with mental health conditions and trying to get appropriate treatments and ways to heal. So I had a very long introduction. In fact, I would probably need to cut it a little bit shorter. What is really relevant here, why I'm here today, is a bit of a journey that started 14 years ago when I was in a pretty dark place and went to a healer who gave me a book, which was one of Stan Grove's books, When the Impossible Happens, in which there was a description of a healing way of holotropic breathwork that Grove developed when LSD was banned in the US. And then I went on and experienced it myself. So I just would like to share with you my first experience, which wasn't just that I jumped on and had a holotropic breathwork session. It was days of preparation, days of getting to know each other, and working up to it. So here it is. I was lying on a mattress on the floor, breathing faster and deeper, listening to an immersing and heart-opening music. I was in a bliss, flying over landscapes, enjoying the beauty of nature. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an overwhelming darkness took over. With a gut-wrenching, painful feeling, a little boy appeared. He was lonely, helpless, and unsafe. I called out to get Tev, the male facilitator, to come and join my female sitter. That little boy is not safe, I told Tev. Oh, Nick, he replied, as he laid down next to me on the floor. Then Tev and my female sitter cocooned me from both sides. Stay with it and sound it out, Tev added later. I followed up with a series of painful, deep, visceral roars pulsating through me. My body was twitching in waves. I brought up some of my stomach content, purging the darkness out of me. The feeling I experienced with my female sitter and Tev holding me between the two of them was that for the first time, both of my parents were holding the little boy to keep him safe together. I felt a new love and acceptance towards that little boy, released his pain and welcomed him back. Gradually, I relaxed into a mix of bliss and exhaustion as my supporters held me for long minutes. So this is what catapulted me out into doing where I am now. From holotropic breathwork, I did quite a few training sessions, which were retreats of weekly duration, and learned about lots of things of altered state of consciousness, how to hold space, how to design music, how to do body work. And of course, there was mentioned the shamanic origin of the work, and also a lot of connections with psychedelics, which I then proceeded further and went to work with some indigenous healers, experienced some indigenous medicine. And I was pretty much a bit biased with ethnobotany myself until someone told me, when we talked about MDMA, yeah, MDMA is not a plant, but it was definitely created in heaven. And I think we all have to agree with that. And another thing that then came, someone mentioned to me, ketamine. Ketamine was something that I used in my medical practice in rural centers, in emergency medicine, and in anesthetics quite a bit. And I was quite aware of their effects that take people on journeys. Unfortunately, in the mainstream, it's all deemed as something that has to be avoided, and we give other medicines, other drugs to suppress those effects. So I got curious, and I went to another training in the US with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which was an experiential training, and had the opportunity to experience it myself, and convinced me that yes, this is something that has to be considered. And the other thing, it's actually legal, off-label, but it's legal. And it started to be used in mental health in Australia as well. Now, we had a beautiful presentation last time, Siobhan Johnson, who gave us a review on the science. I would like to give more of a review on the practical applications of ketamine. So I'm just wondering, share the screen, and yes, here we are. Okay. So ketamine has got a very colorful reputation. A lot of people think it's not really a psychedelic. A lot of people think it's just an anesthetic drug. But once you experience ketamine, the right dose in the right setting, as I did, you can be assured that it is one of the beautiful psychedelic medicines available to humankind. So the history of ketamine starts from 1962, when it was used as a field anesthetic first in the Vietnam War, and it was very popular because it improved the outcome of field injuries. The much safer anesthetic, much safer pain control medicine than an opioid. doesn't suppress respiratory function, and doesn't drop the blood pressure. So the other thing that people mention, it's a horse tranquilizer, and exactly it's a horse tranquilizer because it's so safe to use. You can imagine what sort of anesthetic equipment you need to anesthetize a horse. If you give them the right dose of ketamine, they keep on breathing. You just need to secure the airway, and you can do an operation. So as they used in anesthesia, it's currently used in pain medicine, mentioned emergency medicine, also used in mental health, widely now in the US, in some centers for acute suicidal states, ketamine infusions, functional neurological syndromes in neurology, and mental health. So this is another story with ketamine. If you remember that Thai football team, kids who got stuck in that cave, it flooded in for many, many days. They were retrieved under the effect of ketamine. So they were anesthetized and put breathing equipment on and take them and were took out underwater safely. Because of its safety features, the World Health Organization has a list of essential medicine, and ketamine is part of it. Some countries tried to take it off, like China, a couple of times, but it didn't succeed. It's just a graph of the recent search of ketamine research. I don't want to get much into the research. I don't want to get much into all the receptors that it acts on. It is unique in its major effect on the NMDA receptors, the glutamate receptors, but it has effects on others as well, including the serotonin 2A. So it has an effect on the activity of the brain when you look at it with an EEG. Increases delta and theta activity, which is resembling a meditative state. And it activates the interaction between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, which is how it explains its beneficial effects on trauma-related, particular PTSD affected people. Long-term effects, it potentiates brain-derived neurogenic factor, along with most psychedelics, but other drugs as well, like antidepressants actually do that too. It also limits neuroinflammation, which is a new direction in new drug development in psychiatry. It modulates gene expression involved the circadian rhythm, which helps sleep. And there's a study 2 years ago came out that proved that it increases the number of serotonin 1B receptors in the brain. I think this picture was put up last time. It shows how it helps dendritic growth. It is a rat study, not in humans. And this is the study with the serotonin binding increased number of 1B receptors in the hippocampus. So the mechanism of action in substance use disorders is basically how it helps mental health. There is a large research study from Russia from 1997, which is a controlled clinical trial, but not randomized, that has an amazing result. 2/3 of people maintained abstinence from alcohol after 1 year with a psychedelic dose of ketamine and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy around it. Same was with opioids. Now, a little bit about Spravato. It was mentioned last time that eskatmine that was developed by a drug company, Janssen. Eskatmine means that it's every the molecule has a spatial orientation, right and left orientation. And if you split it in a lab, you get the left and the right separated, and S is the left. And when you study it, it might have different effects. Now, it's claimed that it's got more antidepressant effects. In clinical experience, I'm in a chat group with many psychiatrists who use ketamine, and they use both, and they can't see too much of a difference between racemic, like original ketamine, and eskatmine. So when we talk about harm reduction, I think we have to go a bit further and think about what is actually psychedelic therapy, because there's a lot of ideas around what it actually means. So there are 3 therapeutic frameworks that we can use, for instance, ketamine. There is, we can use it as a drug, and that's what we do in microdosing. And we can use it in a fashion where the client's still awake, still in connection with reality, connection with the therapist, but with an effect that will enhance the psychotherapeutic process. And the third one is the psychedelic. So in the pharmaceutical framework, we titrate the dose to basically a no mind-altering effect. And that's what happens in practice. Like we have some psychiatrists who use this method, and they prescribe ketamine to take home, and the client would take it every second and third day. And then in between, they would see them and might do psychotherapy on appointments, but not under the effect of the medicine. It's usually dosed with lozenges or troches, but you can give a therapeutic dose of ketamine infusion. And again, the infusion is titrated, and it's aimed that it should not have, and it's not aimed to have mind-altering effect. So we just use the pharmaceutical effect of the medicine. So this is the lozenge or troche that I use in my practice. I need to acknowledge Dr. Stephen Hyde, who is a psychiatrist in Tasmania, who developed this type of administration. And unfortunately, where he lives, the regulation doesn't allow him to use it much. It's one of the strictest regulation in Tassie out of all states. But he is well known in the United States, where there is literally dozens of clinics are using this method. So we had a clinical trial with microdosing or clinical data with microdosing in Brisbane with hospitalization of treatment-resistant depression patients, and we found that it did help, but it definitely did not heal them. So this is the way that the setting that the infusion is given. It's very clinical, and some centers they do give you some music, but not connection with the therapist. So the psycholytic framework is that the one that I use in my practice. So this is basically mirroring MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. So what I aim for is have an effect that that helps the client to open up, to make connection with himself, with those hidden painful experiences that are remain to be processed, and the trust that he can bring it up, and the trust that it is something that will help to progress towards healing. And in this setting, we basically use the principles of psychodynamic psychotherapy and the phenomena of projection, transference, countertransference occur, and you need to be ready and familiar how to deal with it. Now, this is what the setting looks like. It's probably quite familiar, a lot of people. And the psychedelic framework is the third one, where you give a large enough dose where the client loses the connection with reality and has experiences of accessing the collective unconscious, cosmic unity, identity dissolution, and it can be changing their view in a dramatic way. It's similarly to using, for instance, psilocybin therapy in what we are more familiar with. So the therapist role in psychedelic therapies, I don't want to go there much, but again with harm reduction, I think this is probably the most important slide that I can show you. I do see clients that that present with bad trip integration, and they suffer, and they won't be able to control the re-emergence of their psychedelic experience with a lot of anxiety, and quite often it's the fear of death that most people be most distressed about. That they fear that they feel that they're imminent death, that they're going to die, and quite often it is something that will come on just any time of the day, but most often at night. So it's something that has to be taken seriously. And I would like to stress that unless we follow the essential steps of psychedelic-assisted therapies, we will most likely run into trouble. Some people won't. A lot of people can have beautiful psychedelic experiences just, in recreational setting if they're lucky. But a lot of them won't. And we know those cases. So the 4 essential steps are patient selection, the preparation, the medicine session, which includes set and setting, and the medicine selection and the medicine dose, and the integration of the experience after the medicine session. So what I would like to mention that in my clinical practice, I will get plenty of referrals and people try to approach me. I would probably take on 1 in 5, 1 in 10 people who come to me for various reasons. The selection criteria that I use is probably a bit overly strict, but in the setting where I am, I don't have much support from other therapists around, so I have to take it on all myself with very little help. I would only see clients who are physically capable of taking ketamine, which has got some exclusion criteria. For instance, thyroid disease that's not treated, serious cardiovascular disease, someone who is not using contraception or pregnant or breastfeeding, and a couple more. There is also some medication that would interfere with ketamine therapy. It's not that it's dangerous interaction, but it would block the effect of ketamine, especially benzodiazepines and lamotrigine, which are very commonly used in mental health. So you can see how and why a lot of people would not qualify to come and have ketamine therapy with me. Now, with preparation, we talk about how the session is going to be, what can be expected, what their fears are, what are their recent experiences, what actually will happen in the session physically, and what are the ways that the clients can help them. What are the resources that they can help them if something go wrong? So I need to go back to the selection criteria a little bit. I do not take on people who have a current active substance use disorder. They have to be abstinent for a period of time and stable. And they also, I would not treat people who have a history of psychotic disorders. Ketamine and other psychedelics can induce a psychotic episode in people who have a psychotic disorder. Now, with the medicine session, the set and setting, we heard about it probably a lot before, but I would like to mention the setting. The setting, I always mention that situation when we had holotropic breathwork workshops, and even before we had the breathwork session, we would sit around and just discuss things in a circle. And that would be like in the first hour or so after arrival. And some clients would fall off the chair and go into a process. And why? Because they feel safe, because they feel that this is a place where they can bring up whatever is up there and pushing to get through and to get processed in a safe setting. So the medicine would help. Medicine would give it an extra boost to open up, but it will not replace the safe setting, the safety of the people who can provide that therapeutic container. And again, I think integration afterwards, it's something that no one would dispute here. But again, it does not always happen. And integration cannot be, in my view and in my experience, limited to a certain number or a certain length of time. I treat people from one session and another. Sometimes it can be just a few weeks, but sometimes it can be a few months or half a year in between sessions when they're ready to come back and we both feel that the next session would be beneficial. So, and in between, there is integration that has to happen. Ketamine addiction, there is a listing of ketamine in the addictive drugs. There is no physical addiction to ketamine. There is psychological addiction, and no one would dispute that some people would use high-dose ketamine regularly, and that can lead to some adverse outcomes. Unfortunately, the ketamine on the underground market, like any other drugs like MDMA, you don't know what you're getting. Like, you know, what Nick showed you before, that something that's marketed as ketamine could be completely different drug. And quite often research chemicals that have not much clinical experience. The adverse effects of and myth of ketamine, I mentioned that it is one of the safest drugs you can use in, for instance, anesthetics. The same applies to the doses that you give in mental health. It's actually much lower dose than the anesthetic dose. Again, even in microdosing, it is very far from the dangerous levels. Now, what's mentioned in the literature is the cystitis that can be very serious. It is happening in people who inject ketamine in very high doses very frequently, multiple times a week. The same, it can cause cognitive impairment in the brain in that high dose. Now, other people use against ketamine that it causes psychosis. Yes, it causes temporary psychosis, which we call a psychedelic state. So, but a lot of my colleagues do not agree with that description. In anesthesia, they have been calling it for a long time the emergence delirium, which is basically that state when they still in between, not quite back into reality. And it can be distressing if they're not prepared. So, and that's why anesthetists quite often give benzodiazepines even in pre-medication. Okay. So I think a lot of people familiar with this chart where, you know, drug experts from around, this was a UK study, 100 drug experts came together and scored the different drugs in its harmfulness. And, you know, the medicines we're talking about are much less harmful than the ones that are legal and readily available in the corner shop. Same in Australia, it was repeated. And the last thing I would like to mention is a beautiful quotation from Ram Dass. I would like to say, if we can give up attachment to our roles as helpers, maybe our clients can give up attachment to their roles as patients, and we can meet as fellow souls on this incredible journey. We can fulfill the duties of our roles without being trapped by the over-identification with them. Thank you.
And I'll just leave that email up on the screen just for one moment if you want to grab that. And our moderators can also grab that so that you can get in touch with Dr. Nikola. Thank you very much for that presentation. If you do have any questions for Dr. Nikola, who I'll just ask to stop sharing the screen, we're going to get to a couple of questions now. So thank you to everybody who has been getting into the comments section and dropping their questions so far. This is Garden State's webcast number 17 on the EGA YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure that you're staying up to date with us as well for all the announcements. Okay, our first question comes from Casa, who would like to know what would be some harm reduction advice for someone experiencing a K-hole.
Well, the K-hole is a psychedelic experience with ketamine. It depends, again, as I mentioned, how well the client was prepared. If the client went in with the intention that he wanted to go into a psychedelic experience, which in case of ketamine would be called the K-hole, which is a dissolution type experience where you might just dissolve into the universe, and that's something that can be very distressing for someone who is completely unaware of this sort of thing to happen and just wanted to have a good time at a party. So the harm reduction advice would be, depending on what happened and what are the consequences, if the client has long-term consequences, like, you know, recurrent distressing emergence of the experience, fear of death, derealization, depersonalization, the big words in psychiatry, interference with their normal existence, with their everyday life, then we would need to find someone who can help, who is familiar with bad trip integration. I have to say, if it's really, really bad, that, the client unable to get out of bed, unable to do basic functioning, then unfortunately you might have to go to just the mainstream professional to get through that, and then go to someone who is able to address the psychedelic side of the integration. But I would advise, if possible, keep it in a safe setting, keep it amongst people who know what it is like, who can reassure, who can acknowledge, who can validate the experience, that it's not going, it doesn't mean it's going mad. A lot of people fear that they think that they're going mad. We can always say that in psychiatry, we say the two hallmarks of psychosis is one is lack of insight and impaired judgment. So if you're aware that you're going mad, you're definitely not going mad. So that's just distress. It's distress that comes from a very unusual, unexpected experience that completely shaken your guts and taken your socks off. So that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, probably something to avoid in a party setting, which I think you covered earlier, Dr. Nikola. Our second question. Sorry.
I mean, in party harm reduction, you always go the small amount and try not to mix it. I mean, all these are. I think everyone repeated it a lot of times ad nauseum.
Start low, go slow. Paul asks, do you know of any research involving ketamine and functional neurological or conversion disorders which have links to trauma?
Functional neurological disorders that links to trauma. I would say it would be very worthwhile trying. Unfortunately, I don't know any large-scale studies that would prove it, but I can assure you that there's many practitioners, especially in the US, who would use it, and it would be very interesting to do a literature research on it, which I have not done just for functional neurological disorders, but it definitely commonly used for trauma-related disorders, PTSD.
We've been talking a lot about your work with ketamine-assisted therapy, but I know that you're involved with a lot more than that as well, including in drug policy. What is there anything that's on your radar at the moment, especially in Queensland? Anything that's going on in terms of advancements in drug policy that has you particularly excited, or is something that you're really keeping an eye on at the moment?
Yes, I mean, I used to be a AMA counselor and was invited to a working group to advise government with drug policy, and they were listening. The police chiefs were listening. So there is a strong on the higher level, there is a strong agreement that drug policy has to change. It's not working. Queensland jails are about 30% over capacity, and at least 40% of them are drug-related offenses. So everyone's aware of it. It's just to get it through the population, and you know, the elections. It's the more of the issue. So you have to get the guts to get over this and make a bold move, which is happening in Canberra, but unfortunately we are still quite far from it in Queensland.
Yeah, and the rest of the states, Canberra always seems to be the lucky one with drug policy and other progressive policies. But I mean, we've, again, been talking about therapeutic uses of these substances. In an ideal world, what sorts of drug policy framework should we have going forward? Do you have any thoughts about this? I imagine it's something that you might have had some long thoughts about. And what would it look like if you could dream the perfect kind of policy?
Well, in the short term, we all probably would all agree who are participating in this webcast that we should achieve decriminalization and make sure that decriminalization is not confused with legalization of psychedelic or other addictive drugs. We know that a lot of harm happens from the exact criminal charges. Broken lives are sealed when someone gets to into the legal system. So it's more harm than physical or psychological harm would ever happen from these medicines or even the addictive substances. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are opioid addicts or methamphetamine addicts. But I think if there was a regulated supply, that would definitely make a huge difference. So I wouldn't give it out like lollies in the supermarket, but a regulated supply would definitely make it a lot safer for the society and for the users.
We really appreciate having you here on the EGA webcast tonight and talking to us about your work and your work in ketamine therapy. And thank you for all the work that you have been doing as well. We have dropped Dr. Nikola Ognyenovits' email into the chat if you want to get in touch with him. And I want to just leave you with one final question, just since you mentioned methamphetamine and opioid addiction there. And it was something that came up in my work today. We were hearing from somebody who's been basically going doing some ethnographic work with some people who have methamphetamine addiction, and the topic of like pharmacotherapy came up. Pharmacotherapy in the opioid scene is there's various different substances that can be used, but there isn't anything for amphetamines. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on pharmacotherapy, which is using another substance or perhaps a very similar substance in a legal and regulated setting for people that are struggling with addiction, or even people that have a dependence that they're, content with. Just want to leave you with that curveball.
To date, no one came up with a substance that would provide a substitution therapy for methamphetamine. I mean, mind you, the substitution therapy for opioid needs also quite a fair bit of motivation from the side of the client and get into a crisis before, because for instance, buprenorphine would never give that sort of high what heroin would to anybody. Wouldn't give that peak effect, but it would give a maintenance that would allow the client not to run into a withdrawal state and some partial effects on the opioid effects that are needed for mental health. So with methamphetamine, we're not even that close. There are a couple of drugs. I mean, there's like this dexamphetamine, which is like basically almost identical to amphetamine, not as potent as methamphetamine, has been trialed as a substitution therapy, would be much better than nothing. But it will not cure the actual cravings for it. So it would just legalize the use and wouldn't let clients, and a lot of times the substitution therapy, the main advantage is that they don't have to commit crime, they don't have to get into that circle when they get that substitution therapy supplied, so they can live a normal life. There is no chemical that would completely dissolve the cravings, except for one that gets the closest in opioids, which is ibogaine.
Unfortunately, there's a kettle of fish.
Unfortunately, ibogaine is very hard to get into a proper setting. It requires a a few days of inpatient stay doing with it. And there are a few centers around the world. I just don't want to promote them here. And there are some dodgy ones as well. So ibogaine definitely would stop cravings, which is absolutely amazing. That's the only one that stops withdrawals in opioid, and to some extent in other drugs as well. It does help in methamphetamine, does help in alcohol use disorder as well. It's sort of that, you know, that way of describing that resetting the brain. It is close to that, not quite. So it gives you a window of opportunity that if you can then change everything around your life that will not draw you back into using, then you have that chance. But a lot of people relapse after ibogaine treatment too, because those factors have not moved on.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Oh, just Ronnie, our oh, sorry.
Nick, mute.
Oh, sorry, hang on. I think everybody else can hear me, but you guys can't. Hang on. How's that? Am I back for you?
You are back now. Yes.
Yep. Apologies. Yes, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight. Ronnie has just asked one final question. Garden States is in December. Will we be seeing you there? And is there a particular speaker that you're looking forward to seeing, if you are coming?
There is very likely that I'll be there, and I will come with a Brisbane crew that we're thinking about. Yes. The speakers, yeah. I mean, I'm interested in all of them. I can't pick up one that I can just recall. I go to these places mainly for having chats to people, having feeling in an environment where I can feel good about talking about things that I don't have to explain myself, and people don't look at me weirdly. So
yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in December. That's Dr. Nikola Ognyenovits, who you can get in contact with, and the comment section there. Make sure to drop in any questions or anything that you have in there. Just having a look at a bit of the lineup for Garden States in December. Recently announced Douglas Rushkoff, who from the Team Human podcast that I mentioned earlier, and so many more. There will be 1 day of streaming. There'll be 2 days of live events, and we really look forward to seeing you there. Our next guest speaker this evening is Dr. Stephen Bright, who has worked as a psychologist within the mental health and alcohol and other drugs field for the past 20 years. He's currently Senior Lecturer of Drug Studies at Edith Cowan University. In addition to psychedelic science, Stephen conducts research into media reporting of AOD-related issues through his organisation, AOD Media Watch, aodmediawatch.com.au, emerging drug trends and harm reduction as well. He's an advocate for an evidence-based approach to AOD legislation and has provided evidence to parliamentary and coronial inquests. He's the co-founder of PRISM, Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine. That's PRISM, PRISM.org.au, an Australian non-profit organisation, research organisation that develops, initiates, coordinates and supports formal research into mainstream medical applications of psychoactive compounds, specifically psychedelics. Stephen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So we wanted to talk about a few things tonight, and I've lost my my series of questions. I'll bring myself up, but maybe if you can just talk to us a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing, because you're obviously very busy, as I just mentioned in in your bio, and there is more. I know that Students for Sensible Drug Policy over in WA is also something that you're involved with. So what's on your agenda at the moment?
Well, my day job, I guess, is I coordinate the teaching of the Bachelor of Health Science major in addiction studies here at Edith Cowan University. And yeah, as you mentioned, SSDP, I was in Melbourne. It was nice to be back. I haven't been back to Melbourne since January 2020. On the weekend to, as a director for Students for Sensible Drug Policy, they were having a strategic planning day in Melbourne. So it was really nice to be back in Melbourne again after, after moving back to WA. I think, you know, we met quite a long time ago, Nick. My interest was initially, you know, as you read out the bio, I think my research interest has been shifting more to psychedelics, MDMA, but it was initially around novel psychoactive substances, the role of drug legislation on these novel psychoactive substances, and the way pill testing might be able to be used as a harm reduction strategy to identify novel psychoactives. I probably came on your podcast, the Psychedelia podcast, many years ago, to talk about the Alcohol and Other Drug Media Watch project. I guess the purpose of that is to try to create some, to try to ensure that media stories are factual, they have appropriate balance, that they're non-stigmatizing, and more than anything, that they're not creating moral panic. With PRISM, we're doing the trial of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for post-traumatic stress disorder here in Perth, and we've recruited the first participant and are hoping to do the MDMA session in the next week or so. I also have a semi-paid gig. Like I get money from a company called Reset Mind Sciences, which is a subsidiary of Little Green Pharma, and they're looking at doing a clinical trial of psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy for treatment-resistant depression. And I can't go into too much detail into the methodology of the proposed study, but I can say that it's looking about recruiting 60 participants, and nobody's going to get a placebo, which is quite cool. I guess that's what I've been up to, mate. I'm exhausted just talking about it, Nick.
Yeah, you keep yourself very busy, and it has been quite the week for psychedelics this week. I mean, look, it's been quite the decade for psychedelics, really. The psychedelic renaissance, or modern psychedelic renaissance, has really has meant that there's a lot more research, there's a lot more discussion, a lot more positive discussion into the role of psychedelics. But we're also starting to see, and I suppose this is kind of inevitable as something grows beyond that sort of beginning stage, and many more players get involved with the field, and it's inevitable you're going to have a wide variety of people involved, a wide variety of motivations, ideas, all sorts of things out there. And some people might have caught Four Corners earlier this week, which was discussing, oh, that's not the right one, there we go, this one, Four Corners earlier this week, which had the episode Psyched Up, put together by Elise Worthington from the ABC, talking about psychedelics in Australia. And you featured on this program talking a bit about psychedelics. I haven't actually caught the episode yet, but I know that there were some revelations, and I'm just wondering if you wanted to briefly reflect a little bit on where we're at in Australia with psychedelics.
Cool. Okay. Well, look, I would say if you haven't watched it, you know, because if other people perhaps that haven't watched it, Nick, I would put the caveat that it's quite confronting. I wasn't expecting it to be so confronting. I guess you know, the nuts and bolts of it is that they had three main stories, and they certainly weren't you know, we've seen a lot of positive media around psychedelics over the last few years, particularly their therapeutic application, potential as treatments. And so it was interesting, you know, if I'm wearing my OD Media Watch hat, it was really interesting to watch this almost 60 minutes type story with three sub-stories. So one was regarding Julian Palmer and underground psychotherapy, or underground work that he does. The issue with the MAPS clinical trials in Canada, and Megan Bussoon, who was I guess you know, groomed by the male psychotherapists in that clinical trial, and of course Mind Medicine Australia. And I guess, you know, I was kind of positioned in it as you know, as a bit of voice of reason. It was a pretty crazy story, and also positioned against some of those other actors as, you know, somebody that's trying to do work in this space, following the law and you know, doing everything with integrity and you know, crossing all the crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's. Yeah, I guess that's the way I saw that I was kind of positioned in it.
So, I mean, what's the future for psychedelic research in Australia? I mean, we've seen this. We know that there are a lot of changes, a lot of research that's going on. We were speaking with Dr. Nikola, who was involved with some of the Monash University training. You mentioned earlier that there's some research that will be upcoming. A lot of things we can't hear about all the details now, obviously. But the next 5 years, what are you expecting to see? Do you think that is it predictable? Or is it political?
I don't know if it's either, actually. You know, that Four Corners story, had that aired 2 years ago, I think it could have been detrimental to our psychedelic science space. But things have really matured in a good way in Australia with psychedelic research. There's you know, some strong startups that have emerged into the space looking at developing new psychoactive drugs. Obviously, they're looking to patent them, and I you know, have issues around that. But a number of universities, just about in every state now, has a psychedelic research, has some sort of psychedelic research underway. They may not have a protocol that's got ethics yet or something like that, but it's certainly grown significantly. I mean, the federal government put $15 million worth of funding into psychedelic research last year, or earlier this year perhaps, and so that's seen 7 groups that were funded to commence novel clinical trials of psychedelic therapies. So yeah, I mean, the space, it's very healthy, and I think the reason why I find it really difficult to answer, you know, where is this going, is it's speeding up at such a rapid rate. I honestly find it very difficult to predict what things might look like in 5 years. I think it's pretty clear that MDMA is highly likely to be a scheduled medicine by the FDA in the USA. In 5 years' time, perhaps psilocybin as well, approved by the FDA or you know, registered as a medicine with the FDA. I don't think we'll see such any rapid changes like that in Australia, because one, our TGA is traditionally conservative, and you know, we saw that when we were talking about some of the stories in psychedelia years back, in terms of the TGA banning, you know, synthetic cannabinoid receptor agonists and various other drugs that we were seeing back in the scene back then. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a bit slower in Australia for these to become recognised medicines. But honestly, I don't think that's such a bad thing, because I think it's really healthy with what's happening in the research space now. There's people like Nikola that are doing work with ketamine, and I think soon there will be enough trained therapists with experience working with these compounds to be able to be in a position where I think the TGA will feel more comfortable regulating these as medicines, down scheduling them from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8. I'm not sure if we'll be there in 5 years, though. The optimist in me says absolutely. But having worked in drug policy now for over 20 years, I'm not sure how much, when I reflect back on the last 20 plus years, I'm not sure how much significant drug policy change there's been. There's been a couple of recent wins in the ACT. You know, they're always progressive, and I think there were some wins back then. Obviously, the Melbourne injecting room is a huge, you know, a huge win for drug policy in Australia. But I don't think it doesn't feel like we've been moving that fast. So 5 years doesn't seem that far away in the drug policy space.
No, you're right. I can think back to 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, and though there are certainly things like you mentioned, the injecting room here in Melbourne, the pill testing fixed site in Canberra, there's also been a lot of steps backwards. You also mentioned the novel psychoactives, specifically the synthetic cannabinoids, where we saw the locked-in process that our legislators have toward psychoactive substances. And in fact, we then saw the introduction of of a entirely broad reaching ban on anything that is considered to be psychoactive, whether or not it even exists yet. The way that our drug laws work was to schedule specific substances, but they were getting tired of this sort of cat and mouse game that was being played with chemical manufacturers who were putting out new substances all the time and putting them into a sort of grey market area. So legislators decided that the best way to move forward was to blanket ban anything considered psychoactive, which just drew it so far away from any link to proof of harm, to any kind of evidentiary base whatsoever. And I think it shows that our legislators are not willing to think about this space. I think that it's a very much a locked-in sort of thinking. I think a lot of them aren't really thinking a whole lot about it, aren't really engaging with the arguments. They just know that it's going to be a vote winner a lot of the time to act in the side of conservatism. So yeah, I think 5 years we'll go up, we'll go down, but yeah,
like just that's just that locked inness. I think actually when we look to the US, I think I'll certainly look to the US and look at states with recreational cannabis. Oregon's decriminalized, and so it looks like there's these really good models over there. But at the federal level, they're kind of locked in with the DEA, and I think that might be just starting to change because the DEA proposed to schedule 5 tryptamine analogs, and I think this is unheard of, that where they withdrew the application. Several psychedelic companies were challenging the DEA. There was a number of psychedelic lawyers had proposed to give evidentiary testimony, and so, but yeah, I agree what you're saying about the locked-inness and sort of the psychophobia we have in Australia, and I think that does still exist in countries like the US, where we often do think they're quite progressive, but it does look like it's changing. So maybe that gives us hope here.
Well, I hope so. Now, as I mentioned at the very top of our webcast this evening, EGA is an organisation that supports, embraces, nurtures the growth of this community. And out of EGA, over a decade ago, I believe, came PRISM, Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine. And it's come a long way in that time. As we sort of mentioned when I was introducing you, there are a number of studies, and many of them that PRISM has helped to engage and to get going. Can you talk to us about where PRISM came from and where it's going?
Yeah, look, I've been reflecting on this recently with the Four Corners story airing. I've had a bit of time for reflection because I've gone on a social media blackout. I don't really want to see what people are saying about me, to be honest. I certainly don't want to engage with anyone at this stage. But yeah, I feel really grateful that I had the opportunity to connect with the Australian psychedelic community through EGA in 2009. I gave a presentation on novel psychoactives because I wanted a safe place to talk about these drugs without creating that moral panic and banning of stuff that you're talking about, Nick, just before. And feel very lucky and blessed that the psychedelic community sort of took me in at EGA. I was provided the opportunity to give a keynote at the 2010 EGA, and I think it was after that EGA that Rick Doblin was at 2010 EGA, and he gave 2 excellent presentations, one of which was on the first phase 2 clinical trial data on MDMA assisted psychotherapy that's ever existed. And, they just finished that study, and Rick's a very charismatic guy. He really talked to people that were close to EGA, involved in EGA, and I was really lucky to be invited to that meeting as a keynote. I was just in the right place at the right time. I was really interested in the MDMA research. I hadn't seen it until Rick presented it, but the data spoke for itself, and having been working in the alcohol and other drugs treatment sector, I was seeing lots of clients or patients with comorbid trauma, and their prognosis wasn't great. I saw a bit of a revolving door of people that we would sort of bandage up and patch up and send back out, and then they would often relapse and we'd see them again. And it seemed like the trauma is what was perpetuating all of this. So I was really excited. Rick was very charismatic, and he really talked the group that were there into the position that Australia could be doing this research. And so that's how PRISM was born, essentially.
Is there anything? Oh, sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, I believe Torsten came up with the acronym PRISM, and also the original website was hosted by Torsten from Charmin Australis.
So is there anything, I know that there are some things that are on the horizon that you can't talk about, but anything that PRISM is involved with that's coming up in the future that you can talk to us about, that you can give us a little insight into?
So there's so I mentioned the MDMA study in Perth. Of course, our flagship study at PRISM would have to be the St Vincent's psilocybin trial, looking at people with late stage illness. In addition to that, there's a trial that Dr. Martin Williams, the executive officer at PRISM, is involved in at Swinburne University, and they're hoping to commence recruitment, I think, very soon. It's being supported, run. I'm not quite sure of how this works, but Sally is a PhD student who's involved in that trial. In addition to Susan Russell, who's sort of, I guess, the senior researcher there, and they're looking at treatment-resistant depression. The psilocybin is in Australia, they're looking at recruiting soon. There's also research Martin's doing at Monash University at the moment, where they're looking at meditators and non-meditators under the influence of psilocybin. Specifically, they're doing brain scan research and ECG, so where they put wires on your head. So look, I've listened to what the experience is like, and even for free psilocybin, I'm not sure I would participate. But and I know they're struggling to recruit at times the participants they're looking for. But it just highlights that there's a lot sort of happening in the space. In addition to that, there is also, I feel like I'm missing a study. There's with Susan Russell, Mel Warner, another director of PRISM. She's looking at a study with 5-methoxydimethyltryptamine with Susan Russell at Swinburne University, and I think they may have ethics, or they're very close to getting ethics to commence that research. And finally, Melissa's very interested in virtual reality and how that interfaces with psychedelics, and I think there's lots of different places it might intersect with therapeutic benefit. Though I have to say that I as I'm talking about this, I really feel my age. I'm a Gen Xer, and I wouldn't do justice to try to explain Mel's VR research, so I'm not going to try.
Yeah, it's very involved, and if you do want to know about it, there are some great videos that Melissa Warner from PRISM has online. In fact, I think on the PRISM website, prism.org.au, there was an event that they held a few years ago, back when we were holding events regularly, called Psychedelic VR, talking about that crossover between the sort of psychedelic and the virtual reality world, and it's a super interesting space. We won't get too deep into it now because it's a whole webcast in and of itself. And sorry, I was showing some of the studies up on the screen, but I was about one behind, so it was a little bit of lag, but you get the idea. Well, okay. I guess to finish us up, because we do have a video from Liam that I want to present to you. If anybody does have any questions as well, any questions or comments, please do drop them into the YouTube chat. Somebody just commenting, Ben just commenting that, and I've seen a lot of this. I've been watching a little bit of the Twitter chat, and I know that it has been a controversial week with Four Corners, saying that he felt that it was a bit of a witch hunt, poorly balanced program, failing to deliver. But I've also heard the complete opposite. Nikola earlier saying that he felt that it was one of the better balanced, and I think it maybe indicates to us that we need to, especially those of us who are involved with the psychedelic space and who are passionate about seeing psychedelics taken seriously, that we need to be able to take these things critically and accept that there will be critiques of this space, and that it's important that we are able to critique it without sort of seeing every critique as a witch hunt. And I mean, that's sort of my perspective, and I understand Ben and others who might hold that perspective as well, that it can be hard as well, because you're also thinking about the political implications. What are other people thinking? How are other people taking this? What does this mean for the future of policy and decisions? But as we said, the TGA, our gatekeepers of these medicines, have long been conservative. They've proved that time and time again with their decisions. You can go and read on their website what they say. You can give them mountains and mountains of evidence, and they will still say no. So I don't know if it's going to affect that. And I think it's important that we ask these questions. But did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, I guess, look, so I think it's really great that the Australian Psychedelic Society has put out a statement. I thought that was, a nice, statement that was put out. AOD Media Watch is considering, doing something, writing something up with the story. And Dr. Liam Engel, who you mentioned is presenting the video next, is sort of looking at that at the moment. I have to say I feel a little close to all of it, and so yeah, I hope that that Liam and working with one of my interns here at ECU might come up with with a way of sort of addressing some of the things that like you mentioned, Nick, it's really polarized people. So from an AOD Media Watch perspective, maybe it is a good story because if you're upsetting, I guess if you're seeing such a strong divide, even within our community, I think it is worth unpacking it. It is worth critiquing it, but doing it in a constructive fashion, and that's what AOD Media Watch really tries to do is deconstruct these stories, but in a constructive way.
AODmediawatch.com.au. Make sure that you check out all the articles from AOD Media Watch, who do fantastic work, critical analysis of drugs in the media. Look, I mean, as I said, I haven't seen the Four Corners episode yet, but anything's got to be better than something that aired on Channel 7 about 3 weeks ago. Channel 7, notorious for terrible articles. Surprised they haven't done their, oh, look at this new Nang's drug thing that's going on article, which they do about once a year. But a few weeks back, they did a piece that was solely focused on one young man's anecdotal experience, talking about feeling like he was possessed, and how psychedelics, put the demon in him. And there was almost no critical engagement whatsoever. There was one addiction specialist there, but it was quite clear that the editing was missing all of the nuance. So I mean, it's the mainstream media. We're going to get what we get from the mainstream media, and I think you just have to expect that they're going to have a certain kind of narrative. But at least if we have a little bit more critical engagement than acid gives you devils, it's probably it's probably a positive overall. Steve, any final thoughts? Anything that you're looking forward to at Garden States this year?
Look, some final thoughts just on the Four Corners. I feel like this was the sort of negative psychedelic expose that Australia had to have. I don't think it certainly wasn't pleasurable to watch. It wasn't, good viewing in that sense. But I do think that it did sort of have to happen. I think it was sort of essential. It is essential viewing. I think people should watch it. But it's not fun viewing. It's not necessarily good television, but I think, if you're in the Australian psychedelic community, I think it is actually essential watching. It's very uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily agree with the production or the way it was edited or anything like that, but I do think it is important that people watch it.
Anything you're looking forward to at Garden States at the end of the year?
I'm just looking forward to catching up with members of the community living here in Perth with borders locked down. And, I visited on the weekend. It was a flying trip. I came in basically for this planning day and had to head off the next day because I had it's the first week of the semester.
You didn't even tell me you're in Melbourne.
Yeah, and no, I didn't tell anyone. Yeah.
FIFO.
was a quick trip. But yeah, I'm really hoping to spend a bit of time in Melbourne and catching up with old friends and yeah, just seeing people in person again is wonderful.
I think that is the part that most people are looking forward to. It's wonderful that we get to do these webcasts, that we get to talk to you over the internet, but in the end, it's only however many pixels your screen can fill, and humans are a whole lot more than a whole bunch of pixels. But you know, we appreciate this opportunity as well, but it will be so nice to see everybody. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, Steve, and chatting with us. And again, prism.org, that's prism.org.au, and aodmediawatch.com.au. Thanks, Steve. Okay, our next and final video comes from Dr. Liam Engel, drug science researcher and communicator. Stephen did just mention Liam. He also works with the AOD Media Watch project. Very busy man, lots of hats worn in this area. He's a research fellow at the Edith Cowan University School of Medical and Health Sciences. Liam's passion is illicit drugs, particularly the areas of harm reduction, psychedelics, ecology, internet, and reform. His unique perspective draws on skills in health and medicine, communications and social sciences, as well as botany and horticulture. And we're going to be delving into that side of his interests now.
Hi, my name is Liam Engel. I work with Entheogenesis Australis and Edith Cowan University, and today I'm going to be giving you a talk called Grow Globs Quick, Micrografting Peyote and Other Slow-Growing Mescaline Cacti. If you've grown cacti from seed before, particularly peyote, you've probably noticed that it takes a very long time to get even a very small plant. And if you're interested in seeing some of these more mature traits, you might have to wait many years to be able to see what the peyote looks like. So using grafting, particularly micrografting technique, can really accelerate the speed with which your cacti is growing. So this slide talks about mescaline cacti in general, and you can use the techniques we're going to talk about for growing any of these, but this kind of gives a context of what how I understand our social responsibility around mescaline cacti. So you can see that I have kind of given a key system at the bottom there, which says common source of mescaline, threatened and slow growing. And so slow growing is interesting to this tutorial, obviously, because we want to grow things faster using this grafting technique. Threatened is kind of always important because, you know, it's a question of how we interact with our environments and some kind of responsibilities that we have. And common source of mescaline is, you know, what people are regularly consuming to experience mescaline. So you can see that those three keys actually only line up on one thing listed in the mescaline cacti slide here, and that's for peyote or Lophophora williamsii. And obviously it's a concern when there's a threatened and slow-growing cacti that's also a common source of mescaline, because if we're commonly using this as a source of mescaline, then we're potentially creating an environmental threat. So that's just something I think that anyone working with peyote should kind of be aware of and mindful of. And you know, this slide is just kind of generally interesting as well, particularly in regards to slow growing, because I think they're likely things that you're going to use this micrografting technique on, because they're things that you might be kind of more incentivized to accelerate your growth so you can see further into the cacti future. This is a photo by Keeper Trout. It shows peyote in its natural habitat and gives you an idea of what some of these more mature traits of peyote look like. And, you know, if you haven't seen a peyote before, well, now you have. And it's useful to compare to San Pedro, which is in this second image I'm showing you now. And that's because I'd say these two plants are the most common sources of mescaline. And obviously, to say two plants is an oversimplification. Lophophora williamsii is a single species. San Pedro is not a single species. In this photo, you can see both Trichocereus pachanoi and Trichocereus bridgesii, which are two popular species in the San Pedro group, but we could probably, you know, observe maybe 9, 10, perhaps more species in that group as well. But we would be unlikely to use this micrografting method to grow San Pedro because they already grow so quickly. people might, if there's something they want to propagate in particular, maybe it has some kind of deformity or something interesting around this plant that is really wanting you to get more quickly. But generally, San Pedro grow quite quick on their own roots. So, you know, grafting often isn't as necessary or seen as necessary. This is probably a plant that you're less familiar of. It is what I might call the true false peyote. There's kind of, as you saw on one of those previous slides, there's a lot of different false peyotes or plants that we might call a false peyote. And there are a number of reasons for this. A false peyote might be something that was traditionally used as a peyote substitute. It might be something that has mescaline in it and people currently think it looks like peyote, so they call it a false peyote. Maybe it has no mescaline at all and it looks to some people this globular shape similar to a peyote also, so people might call these plants a false peyote too. But what's interesting about this one, Pellicyphora acelliformis, is that it is the only false peyote to be traditionally used as a peyote substitute that also contained kind of a significant mescaline content. So basically this is the one cacti besides peyote and San Pedro that people traditionally use to get a mescaline effect. You might have seen some publications that suggest that there have been finds of mescaline in plants outside of the cactus family, but I kind of dispute those findings. And the reason for this is that normally if you found mescaline in a plant, you'd expect to find some other alkaloids that are helping produce the mescaline. And in lots of these papers, not only are they not finding these kind of expected, precursors for mescaline, you are also finding kind of other random things. The paper on this slide seems to have found nicotine and amphetamine as well as mescaline, as well as none of these other related compounds that the plant might use to produce mescaline. So it seems quite unlikely. And there's a trend of kind of papers being published like this, where they've done an analysis of a plant and they found, a whole range of substances, and then they publish the list as a kind of spectral compendium. And often these lists aren't very well peer-reviewed. They're not kind of picking it apart in the same way that I am, thinking, hey, you found mescaline, but why haven't you found these other things? And I suspect if we dug a little deeper, then it would be unlikely that any of the findings for mescaline in plants outside of cactus is very strong. Yeah, I think my assumption is mescaline is in cacti, and I'm certainly not convinced it's in this Acacia rigula or some of these other plants. Here's a photo of what it looks like when you've successfully done this micrografting technique, and I've got some false peyotes on top of Perisciopsis on here. They're Astrophyta mysterias. They're quite pretty. They're actually also endangered, but unlike peyote, people aren't harvesting them for their mescaline content. It seems to be more kind of horticulturalists and just people that want pretty plants. Another important thing, both for micrografting, grafting, and I think for growing cacti in general, is this understanding of how sunlight hits different parts of where you live differently. And I think the easiest way to understand this is, because people get confused, right? If your house is here and the sun goes like this, you're not really going to get anywhere except on the roof that gets full sun all day. But we're not actually talking about this full sun concept. I'm talking about filtered sun, and that's why shade cloth is important here. So this chart breaks down the different functions you might use a different level of shade. So this can be unlike the example of the house where, one side of the house is getting the morning sun and one side is getting the afternoon sun. We can kind of presume that this shade box is in full sun. So on the roof of my weird example. But what's important is you can buy shade cloths in different kind of strengths of how much they're filtering. And depending on that depends how much light they get, how intense the light is. And so you can put more sensitive plants under a thicker shade cloth. And the basic breakdown I use is, so 90% shade, that's kind of, I've got here listed 90%, 70%, 50%, and 0%, which is no shade. But those three shade cloths are kind of the typical thickness that you would find at Bunnings, right? But this 90% shade, this most shady shade cloth, is useful for stuff that's really sensitive. So obviously seeds, when we first raise them, they're a prime example of that. But so are So of like grafts after we've healed them, after we've done this micrografting technique, and also variegated plants that struggle to produce chlorophyll. But if we have still some shade but less, we can use them after we've healed our grafts, particularly, or plants that we're just tapering on to more sunlight. And then grafted peyote, I put 50% and I put 0% for San Pedro on full sun. It kind of changes, and it depends what the plan is, how much sun it's had in history. And the basic concept is tapering it on, but I would use these kind of shade percentages as a guideline for these plants if you didn't have any idea to start with. But some will be able to handle more, some will be able to handle less. All right, we are at the first more tutorial part of this talk. So here's a list. This is what you need, right? If you want to grow cacti from seed, you're going to need the seeds themselves. You're going to need a sealed transparent container. In EGA, we've been promoting a technique called the Coke bottle tech, which would be if you kind of want to advance this and get a bit more fancy, but let's not. Let's keep it simple, right? So sealed transparent container, takeaway container equivalent, spray bottle, water, a cup, and cacti soil, which ideally will be sifted, and normally we roughly work at about 50% organic material to 50% drainage. This is what it looks like when you put that seed in a cup of water. And normally before I plant, to increase germination rates, I'll put my seed in a cup of water for 24 hours and let them soak. Fill my container with soil. I've got to apologize. In this image, I didn't sift my soil, you notice, so this isn't ideal, but cacti thrive on neglect. That's the whole point, so don't worry too much about that. You can use crappy soil. You don't even use nice, you don't have to use nice drained soil either. You can use cheap potting mix stuff and it'll still probably do the job for the most part, at least at the start. And then we're going to spray that soil with water. And then we're going to pour the seeds that we've been letting soak in that water over our sprayed and filled container of cacti soil. Then we want to place it in somewhere with 70 to 50% shade. We can use a shade cloth box like we said before, or if you know the kind of different light filtering at your home, maybe you've got a spot already, but shade cloth is good if you're not sure. In a few months, you should have something that looks like this. Baby cacti seeds ready to be grafted, or if you don't want to graft, you can just let them keep growing. But I suggest you should graft it because grafting is fun and interesting, if not ethically complex. But I think it looks cool and it's a nice way of having some more engagement with your plants, particularly, you know, if you've sowed a bunch of peyote seeds and they're going to stay the size of a pinhead for a year or a couple of years, all you do is watch them, right? But if you micrograft, you can wait, say, 2 weeks and then be ready to graft them. So you have a reason to have a bit more engagement with what you're growing as well as accelerating the pace. So it's fun. It's fun too. And what we're going to need for that, you need some rooted stock that you're going to micrograft on. In theory, you could probably use any stock, right? You could probably use San Pedro, but because we're using such small seedlings, we would normally match the size of the seedling to the size of the stock. And so things like Selenocereus or Perisciopsis are quite popular. Perisciopsis is also particularly popular for this micrografting method because it's like a partially aquatic cacti and it can take heaps and heaps of water without the roots rotting. So by grafting something on top of that, you can give it way more water and way more fertilizer than you would have been able to give the little seedling on its own roots. You know, there's arguments around this. People think that it makes plants that, you know, don't look true to form in their habitat. The plants typically produce less mescaline. People say they look bloated. But I think people are just judgy. All plants are cool. Do whatever, give this a try. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. But I still think grafting's a fun thing to do. We also want a cutting board, the germinated cacti seeds we just prepared. We want a sealed transparent container to fit the stock. Different to the container we used last time, this needs to be bigger. So if your stock is 30 centimeters high and your skein is 2 centimeters high, we're going to need a container that's at least 32 centimeters high to fit it all in there. But the purpose of this is to increase humidity. We want a sharp blade. We want a sterilizing solution so that sharp blade and everything else we deal with is nice and clean. And we want some paper towel. First step, pull the seedling out of the container and chop it in half, roughly at kind of the widest section. Then you can cut the tip off your rootstock and push your little seedling on top, which will look something like this. The main trick here is to ensure the vascular bundles connect. basically it will look like a small kind of white ring in the center of your perisciopsis or your alternative grafting stock. And depending on how big your seedling is, maybe it'll just look like a white dot in the center of that. But you want that white dot or whatever that white vascular kind of mark in the center of your seedling to rest on some of the white vascular ring of your grafting stock. Because I think a poor analogy is, they're pipes that the nutrients can travel through. So if the dot of your or the circle goes inside another circle, they're not lining up, and so nothing is passing through the pipes. So your scion isn't getting any of this nice energy from your stock plant. Then we want to put that graft that you've just put on top that hasn't healed yet in that sealed box where it's nice and humid under some shade cloth that's about 90%, and we'll probably only need that for 2 to 3 days. And that's less about the shade cloth that I'm talking about there and more about the humid container. But if we keep the humidity in there, that can discourage the scion on top from drying out, which I think, particularly when we're using these very small seedlings, they seem, if I just leave them outside or in kind of normal conditions, there's a chance that it'll shrivel up like a little sultana, and we don't want that. But then kind of after it's healed, after we've got through that period in which it can dehydrate, because once it's healed, the pipes are connected, right? So it's not gonna shrivel because it's going to keep on getting water through those pipes. Then we can just put it in the same kind of conditions as our regular grafts, or ideally in the similar conditions that the seedlings were originally growing, which I'm guessing is 70 or 50% shade. 2 to 3 months later, you should have something that looks like this. Healed Astrophytum asterius graft on some perisciopsis, or maybe you have some peyote, or maybe you have some peyoteo, or maybe you have some other false peyote. You can use this technique for a variety of plants, both including peyote, false peyote, and beyond peyote. I was saying San Pedro before. You can use it like this. I think, trying to imagine why I might micrograft San Pedro, most likely for me, that would be because I had a variegated seedling that maybe I was worried it was going to survive, or I just wanted to make it grow faster. Often variegated seedlings aren't very, tough on their own roots. So if you enjoyed this talk and you want to start growing some cacti or doing some micrografting yourself, my first tip is to encourage you to get in touch with growers themselves. Doing that kind of directly, normally it'll be cheaper. You'll also get access to more interesting stuff, because when people are, selling stuff for market, they normally A, won't give away their best stuff, and B, they're trying to kind of target what's popular. And normally what's interesting isn't popular. You might know about it until you speak to the grower, and they might tell you that they've got something cool and give you a story, and you're like, hey, I want to do that. But that's my basic advice. Go through growers. It'll be cheaper. You'll get cooler stuff. And the good place to start to do that, I think, is Facebook. It's an easy environment to kind of get in touch with people personally and directly. And I'd recommend checking out some of these Facebook groups, both for pictures of plants that you like and to get an idea of different people that might be growing those plants. So Trichocereus auctions Australia, Trichocereus lophophora and Areocarpus, and Oz Cactus seed sales, I think, are probably all good places to get started. But if you want to skip all that and you just want to go straight to a vendor, I recommend Charmin Australis Botanicals, Herbalistics, Trichocereus Australia, and the Cactus Orgy, which you can find on eBay. If you want to hear me continue to rant about cacti, you can do it in text form and verbal form. I have a list of a whole variety of these related things here. Feel free to consume more of meat and cacti legally. Make sure to check out the rest of the awesome ethnobotanical material at the Entheogenesis Australis website, and in the meantime, keep growing cactus.
And thank you very much to our guests, Dr. Nikola and Dr. Stephen, who have joined us on tonight's webcast. And thank you to you for joining us for tonight's entire live event. We really appreciate the discussion in the YouTube comment section. Make sure to keep it going on social media. Make sure to connect with us. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter as well. And head across to the Garden States website, gardenstates.org. You will see now, as time goes on, more and more is added, more and more information about the December event, including some more specific information about our Friday streaming event with some remote contributors. So you can see that on the main page there, or if you go up to 2022 conference and drop down there, you can go to the Friday streaming event and see some of the people that will be speaking to us in December. So thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you in December. Make sure to get your tickets because they are on sale now. Many of them have sold. Make sure to grab one and, not miss out. Our next webcast is to be announced, but that's why you should stay connected with us. Gardenstates.org, follow the links to subscribe to our newsletter and keep in touch with us. Thank you very much. Make sure to catch that Four Corners episode if you haven't already, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you and good night.